So as I mentioned before, the at the end of this month is when we're expecting the testnet v2 to sort of to come out and launch, and that's Yamfore finalized. And obviously, TX Pipes is in our repo, so they can immediately start auditing that.
What is going on, Ada Nation? Welcome to Dapp Central. My name is Fareed. Today, I'm going to be joined by Brandon, who's going to be the founder of the Yamfore protocol. Now, I did have Brandon on the channel here about a year ago to get an introductory look at what Yamfore is going to be building, which is going to be a lending and borrowing protocol on Cardano. So without any further ado, let me bring up the man himself. Brandon, good morning. How are you doing?
Hey, Fareed. How are you? I'm good, thank you. I'm good. Thank you for having me again. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly time flies. Can you believe it that it's already been a year since we last chatted, and so much has happened since then, on Cardano and just in crypto. So I'm excited to
Mm.
hear what has been going on at Yam4 as well.
Definitely, definitely. We've just been building. So I remember chatting to you last, and I think we were talking about just the upcoming testnet v1, which
Mhm.
is what we've actually coined afterwards, because we are releasing another sort of testnet variant, but we had really quite a lot of success with that. So it's good to sort of come back and sort of talk more about our progress. But yeah, we've been building. There's been a lot of ecosystem changes and improvements, and we've kind of seen Cardano just as a platform, as a DeFi platform, sort of grow. And I think when we talked, it was about the beginning of the year or so. And I remember there were less than 10 dApps recorded on DeFi Llama. And now there's actually significantly more than that. I believe the number has doubled. So just the rate of development and the pace of just improvements has been quite astounding.
Yeah, I've been looking at platforms, for example, like Cardano Cube as well, where there is so
Mm,
much information surrounding brand new dApps coming online. And that's been mind boggling to take a look at as well, just to really see the ecosystem growing. Not only do we have projects growing in house, right, or that are Cardano native, but we're also even seeing projects coming from outside of Cardano into the ecosystem with, I think, TangleSwap, which is a DEX being the latest
mm.
one to join our ecosystem. So, again, really good to see so much progress being put forth when it comes to Cardano, which is a chain that I think we all believe in, specifically you, right, with Yam4
Yeah.
being built as a Cardano native project. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. This is going to be an update chat.
Mm,
Talking about everything that has changed since then and what we can expect from the Yam4 protocol. Now, we're going to be focusing strictly on, I believe, your recent testnet experience. And then I
mm.
want to jump into something that I believe you guys are going to be doing a little bit different, which is going to be progressive governance. In closing, I do want to touch on your fair token offering, or your FTO, as well as the tokenomics and what we can expect from that. So without any further ado, Brandon, do you mind maybe kicking us off with a brief introduction to Yam4 and maybe just kind of recapping what the platform is aiming to build and bring over into Cardano?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So Yamfore is a decentralized lending and borrowing protocol building on Cardano. Yamfore is taking a very sort of different approach to other sort of more traditional lending and borrowing protocols. We're offering crypto-backed loans with no margin calls, no liquidation risk, no ongoing interest repayments, and indefinite loan terms. The way Yamfore is able to do that in a very much a nutshell, we've obviously got the documentation and light paper out there, but the way Yamfore is able to offer that is that the fact that the protocol owns all liquidity on it. So every single loan that's been issued by the protocol itself is owned by the protocol, the capital behind that. So this allows Yamfore to actually offer these sort of crypto-backed loans with a lot more freer terms, if you will. And what the protocol is essentially doing is actually investing in ADA alongside the borrower. So it's a protocol that's very much hedged on ADA itself. If ADA is doing well, Yamfore is doing well. If ADA is in a slump or sort of just in a very much a I suppose, crab market, if you will, that's very much what Yamf was sort of experiencing, right? There is a bit more nuances to it, but that's a general sort of overview. So in many ways, CBLP, which is the underlying token, which we'll talk about more, that you're required to actually take out a loan position on Yam for, is very much adjacent to ADA in regards to just overall macro trends, if you will. So that's Yam for in a nutshell, essentially. Also, just like to clarify as well, it's also not. It's also targeting a very niche demographic of people. So Yamfore is meant to be targeting the type of borrowers that would want a loan position with just very much a passive approach. So that's the no interest repayment, no ongoing interest repayments comes in, no liquidation risk, no sort of worrying about any of that sort of keeping up and topping up your collateral and keeping up with your position. So that's sort of the target demographic Yamfore is approaching and going for.
Fair enough. Thank you for that. Now, I do want to just ask a quick follow-up question with regard to you guys bootstrapping the protocol. Are there any rough ideas or estimates as to how much liquidity you guys are planning to provide to the protocol initially on mainnet launch?
Yeah, so we're still sort of deciding with that. We're not quite sure at the moment, but something in the realm of, let's say, 50 to 100K in USD terms, right? So just to sort of keep the boat going. We also have the incentives. So this is a bit early on, but with the FTO, there are actually inbuilt incentives where the buying or the participation in the FTO sort of kickstarts the process of the protocol lending out, and that lending obviously goes to the back end of the CBLP secondary market, which in fuel sort of like continues on. So I'll dive more into that, but essentially just we are sort of kickstarting with a nominal amount, but the incentives are sort of there that it just continues on in a sustainable manner until the market sort of decides the end value of what the FTO sort of raises essentially.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. I think it's always really good to know, especially in a situation like Yam4's,
Mm.
where you guys will be basically holding the liquidity that's available to be lent and borrowed.
Yeah,
So,
the protocol the
mhm,
protocol does. We don't have any sort of like the protocol, but yeah, I know what you mean.
mhm. Yeah, no, I appreciate the clarification. I think it's important to clarify that. So, not
Mm,
you personally, but like you said, the protocol. Let's jump into the latest news surrounding the testnet. So I believe the
mm.
testnet kicked off. I want to say now it's probably been over maybe 5 or 6 months. I may be incorrect here. I know,
It's
like I
been,
said, time has been flying.
yeah,
But
it's been.
yeah, how has the testnet been? What kind of feedback
Mm.
have you heard from the community, and what changes are being made as of the latest round of community feedback?
Definitely. So I believe the testnet V1 was around about May or so, just around early in the year slash almost early middle of the year, if you will. We got a lot of feedback. We got a lot of generally positive feedbacks. There were some things we had to work on. One of them just sort of being user experience with the UI UX aspect. So yeah, for in many ways from the get go, we've gone for I believe the terminology, it's coined a neo-brutalism style affair, right? So this is very similar to curve finance from the people that are from Ethereum. So it's very much like a very 2D sort of like very retro-ish sort of styling. Obviously, some people aren't the biggest fan of that. So we do have some other sort of color schemes that are sort of more adherent to modernish styling, if you will, when it comes to the UI UX aspect. So we do have that in the works. So we also have the fact of just simplifying things as well. Like we like to sort of categorize things and make sure people aren't sort of bombarded. So we have gone for a more minimalist approach. Apart from that, though, we did fairly well, I would say, on the back end aspect. So the fact that the protocol is obviously tailoring towards a niche group of people, so there's going to be a limited amount of participants at any given moment. But even in that aspect, though, we've sort of built Yamfor in a way where contention is not really an issue. So there is contention on some aspects, but it's to a level where it's actually quite it's not too much of a hindrance, right? It's more of an occasional annoyance. And that was done purposely just in regards to just the mindset of if you will, the trade-offs, right? So because of the fact that we've gone for this sort of design styling, we don't have any sort of batching or sequences on the back end, right? So this gives obviously there's a bit more resilience in the sense that it's more decentralized. There's not that sort of component, and of course, batches can be decentralized if the code is open sourced, and you can actually have multiple multiple stake pool providers participating in batching, etc. But in our case, though, we've completely sort of foregone that and sort of chosen this very much more straightforward with the occasional sort of contention aspect. Yeah, apart from the UI aspect and sort of just getting a feel for the load when people are actually utilizing the protocol, we're pretty happy with where we're at. We've got we've obviously sort of refined the testnet v2, which is going to be the finalized version of Yamfore, which is coming up very soon. So by the time this comes out, the dev blog post explaining our timeline will actually have come out as well. So we're hoping, and this is tentatively, but we're hoping for a launch at the end of this month, so the end of November. So that's kind of like our viewpoint for the testnet v2. And when the testnet v2 launches, since that's the finalized version of Yamfore, it's immediately it's immediately going to be audited by TX Pipes as well. They're in our repo, they've got access, so it's going to be like that. And yeah,
Sounds
that's kind of a overview. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, not a problem. I want to make sure that you've got time to get everything out. So I hope I didn't cut you off there.
No, no,
Um,
not at all.
cool, cool. So from what I heard, it sounds like a lot of very positive feedback, some updates surrounding the theme and just the user experience, which I do think is pretty key as well. I recently sat
Mm,
down with Sean Roller from the Jira Wallet team, who's got a lot of UI and UX experience. And that's been something that he's been trying to focus on, not only within Jira Wallet, but just trying to raise awareness surrounding the fact that we need to have a simplified user interface in order to onboard and in order to have our protocols be palatable or digestible, right? You can
mm,
have the biggest or the most revolutionary protocol, but if people don't understand how to utilize the platform, then I think it kind of negates all of that, right? So it's been interesting
mm,
for me to see and watch, and just even document my own experiences with different dApps as to how user friendly they are. I think a lot of times within crypto, people assume that, because you're dealing with other people that are involved in crypto, that they'll just take, whatever. But I think for us to really reach that mass level of adoption, we need to make sure that all these apps are friendly, even for your neighbor that has never heard of Cardano or that's never done lending and borrowing before, right? So I'm really
mm.
happy to hear that you guys are focusing on that. And then you also mentioned something that really actually sparked another question. So you talked about load and you talked about an initial set of users being able to access the protocol early on. Do you
Yep.
mind touching on, what you guys have optimized for, given again that you guys are going to be not you guys, but that the protocol is going to be owning a lot of the liquidity that's available early on? How many people will be able to actually utilize the platform or be able to jump in there and lend and borrow? Obviously, that hinges on how much they're lending and borrowing. But what
Mhm.
are I guess your thoughts surrounding that and what you guys have come up with so far?
Yeah, yeah. So the main issue, or I suppose what I was talking about before, is just contention. So for the people that aren't familiar, because Cardano uses the UTXO model, which is the complete opposite from Ethereum, the accounting model. Um, every single, just trying to figure out the best way to explain this. Every single bit of funds in the system, right? It's sort of treated as like, so when you have a UTXO, you essentially have like a parcel of funds. And this is obviously a very high level overview aspect of There's a lot more nuances to it. But you have essentially a parcel of funds when you have a UTXO. And let's say you've got 10 ADA in that UTXO, right? The issue comes in when, let's say, a protocol has that and people are trying to spend from that UTXO at the same time. This is where you have contention. This is where two people submit a transaction to spend from that individual UTXO, and one of those transactions gets processed, the other one is rejected. This can obviously lead to a terrible user experience if you have multiple users trying to spend a single UTXO, and you constantly just have these sort of clashes going on where transactions, for the most part, are just cancelled, right? It's very hard to actually secure any sort of it's very hard to do anything on that Dapp because someone keeps beating you to it, right? So that's the main problem in a nutshell. With Yamfore, we sort of did realize going with this, okay, we're going to have contention, but can we at least have contention to a acceptable rate? Because the trade-offs are there. If you don't, with going with obviously this sort of more simplified I suppose smart contract design with contention, we've obviously avoided the batching system and all of that sort of all of those things on that aspect. And frankly speaking, we don't actually need it for what we're building. So what we've done is we've tried our best to sort of parallelize. So we make so the biggest point of contention. The biggest point of contention with the protocol, the biggest aspect where contention comes into play is when you're actually trying to acquire a loan position through Yamfore, because you're spending from the treasury script, right? You're spending from the I should say, stablecoin treasury. So in that case, we've actually sort of we've paralleled them, if that's a word, where there's multiple of these sort of UTXOs to spend from. So when someone initiates a transaction, there's very much a very low chance of that contention occurring because again, you're sort of dealing with these multiple stablecoin treasuries, these multiple stablecoin treasury UTXOs, if you will. So that's one aspect as well. And the really beautiful thing is when it comes to just paying off your loan position, because every single loan position is treated as an individual UTXO itself, there is no contention in that aspect. So if you need to have your funds accessed immediately, if you're ready to sort of pay it off, let's say ADA's appreciated significantly or so, you can always be guaranteed that your transaction will get through. So that's the aspect. It's only you only might face some issues here and there when you're actually applying for entering a loan position. And we got that feedback as well on Testnet V1. But after just a couple more tries by the people sort of facing that issue, they were able to get through. So it's just sort of about so it's basically about just building enough stablecoin treasury UTXOs in enough variety where that just becomes a bit of a minor issue for the average person entering Yamfore and utilizing it. So that's basically that issue in a nutshell.
Yeah, thanks for the definition there. I think even for myself, right, I'm always learning new things, and that's one thing that I hadn't thought about, right, that batchers do solve is that contention issue. Now, I think the trade-off, as you mentioned earlier, is that without having or without utilizing batchers, I'm sure that that has greatly simplified the smart contracts that are needed for YM4 to operate.
Exactly.
But then on
Yeah.
top of that, I'm sure that it also reduces a lot of the cost associated with building out YM4 since you don't need all these other intricate pieces to get the protocol up and running. So I think, again, it is a trade-off. It'll be interesting to see, once things are live on mainnet, how that experience is. But it's really great to hear that on testnet, you've already gotten this feedback. So I think a lot of people I don't want to generalize, but a lot of people don't put an emphasis or don't put enough emphasis on early testing. And I think it's valuable information like this that you get back from the community, right? That really helps to propel and prepare you not only for V2, but also for the main net. Now, some other things that I do see here as a part of the latest development update, which I'll leave the link to down below for anybody watching this video, in case they want to check it out on their own, are going to be some updates surrounding the new stats page. There's also some improved loan information, as well as a brand new market section that has been finalized. Now, at the very bottom there, it talks about a vote section. So it
Mm.
states, although progressive governance remains an initiative after the protocol's initial mainnet launch, the team has begun tentative work on the mechanisms as well as the accompanying UI UX experience. So Brandon, do you mind touching on what progressive governance is and how that differs from current governance that we've come to know and love on Cardano?
Yeah, absolutely. So progressive governance is basically Yamfore's best attempt at creating a very much inclusive and very simplified, straightforward method of CBLP holders in our case participating in governance. So progressive governance aims to take away a lot of the third party sort of like any sort of element that comes when it comes to the governance aspect that isn't on chain. So a lot of the trust issues, right? If you have to sign up for a forum or if you have to go on social media to sort of voice for a temperature check or any of that sort of stuff, it just tends, it's aiming to sort of eliminate that and strictly deal with the on-chain truth aspect, if you will. Progressive governance, from a mechanism standpoint, is basically tug of war, is what I can best describe it. As in, you have a set of on-chain parameters that you vote on being a CBLP holders, and those on-chain parameters stay persistent. So, for example, the ADA flat fee. So this apologies, the CBLP flat fee. So the CBLP flat fee is starting at let's say 20% or so, right? If you wanted to vote for that to go down or upwards, etc., you would sort of put your vote in the lower or increase sort of bucket, if you will, right? And someone else would have to sort of can either join you or they can either be opposed to it. And essentially, you're staking your CBLP directly into the protocol smart contract. And once you reach a certain threshold, that's where that change occurs. So it's basically just a sort of tug of war in that aspect. And once that change occurs, it's actually very incremental. So you don't go from 20% to 25%, you go from 20% to 21%. So it's just a very sort of incremental change. And then from 21%, you need to go to 22%, and so forth and so on until you reach 25%. So you have almost these you have these 5 sessions, or these 5 sort of voting experiences, or these 5 rounds, if you will, to actually get to that 25% aspect. So this is kind of the give and take. So because of the fact that progressive governance allows anyone to vote at any time on any sort of any of these persistent on-chain parameters, you have the sort of like guardrails up in regards to those changes are actually rather incremental. So it's kind of the best analogy I can sort of bring with that as well, and it's really good, is if you're lifting weights at a gym, you go progressively in a very small incremental fashion. You go progressively high. You just don't go from like 100 kgs to 120. You sort of work your way up. So that's kind of the idea of progressive governance. It's these sort of incremental changes that occur, and people can sort of be constantly voting on these sort of like persistent on-chain parameters, lending parameters, at 24/7. So that's the sort of core nutshell of that. And yeah, it stops. And what's really really fun, good about what's really really fun, I think, and well, more than fun, what's really essential and important about that is it stops people from having to go through these sort of centralized aspects of these sort of like forums, or, and not that anything is necessarily wrong with that. It's just it's not ideal, right? To sort of get a temperature check or etc. All the parameters that you'd want to vote on for the protocol are already there. And actually, in our Gitbook docs, you've actually, on the CBLP tokenomics section, you've actually got a list of all the on-chain parameters that can be voted on when progressive governance comes through. So that's kind of progressive governance in a very much a nutshell. Just these sort of list of on-chain parameters that you can vote on directly through the Dapp itself. And that's another thing. That's another aspect as well. It's directly through the Dapp. There's no need to go through any sort of third-party services, etc. It's just directly through Yamfore, and you're dealing with smart contracts at the end of the day as well. There's yeah.
That's really cool to hear. I do have a question. So I like the fact that you just mentioned that it's going to be done directly through the Dapp, right? Gives people the confidence that, hey, I can do everything in-house. I don't have to worry about leveraging some sort of third-party website or some sort of third-party tool to get my voice heard, right? Again, it's all being done natively through the M4 app. So that's, I think, a huge plus. Now, when you were explaining the actual voting process and you'd mentioned, the tug of war, do you
Yeah.
mind giving us an example to put this into perspective? Because from what I understand, for example, a platform like MinSwap, what they'll do using their governance portal is they'll basically have a quorum, which is basically how many votes utilizing the Min governance token have to be used in order for that vote to actually be valid. But then it's
Mhm.
typically like a yes or no. So do you mind maybe just explaining how the progressive governance is different? I understood the second part about the incremental or the slow shifting changes. And I've actually got another question surrounding that as well, which was just going to be surrounding how much time is in between each of those incremental updates, right? So you mentioned, for example, the CBLP flat fee or the ADA flat fee, increasing from
Mhm.
20 to 25%, over what time period will that happen? Will that be 1% every month, 1% every year, or is that actual time value also something that can be voted on? So two questions there, one surrounding
Mhm.
the timing of the incremental updates, and then maybe if you can just walk us through some sort of example
Example.
scenario. Yep, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, with the CBLP flat fee, if so, we will have a quorum for just the amount of votes needed to just pass anything, just to pass around in progressive governance, right? So that is actually one of the on-chain parameters in progressive governance. So you can vote for that to get increased through progressive governance. But just in regards to the quorum, we will have a quorum, and the quorum will be shared across all of the lending parameters. So let's say it's 500 CBLP tokens, right? So 500 plus, I should specify that, right, in favor of. So what happens is you have the CBLP flat fee, and someone votes in, and they put, let's say, 100 CBLP tokens for a yes vote to increase the flat fee by a percentage. That's the increment in this case for that particular lending parameter. Someone else comes in and they vote no by 100 CBLP tokens. So that actually cancels, they cancel each other out. So you're back to zero now. So that's essentially how that sort of works in regards to the tug of war. So eventually you just need to have, you need to have 500 of that's 500 of essentially a yes vote for whatever no or yes, when it comes to that. So if someone's voting the opposite, they essentially cancel your vote out and it's a standstill. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. When it comes to the timing aspect of it, instant. So like when we vote for, let's say we go from 20% to 21%, every single person with a vote can withdraw that that voted, right, that has CBRP locked in, can then choose to withdraw their CBRP and revote, right? So essentially, the CBRP tokens locked from the prior vote, they don't automatically go to the yes vote or no vote or whatever camp they were on. They have to be withdrawn, and you have to revote again. So that's how that works. So you can go from 20% to 25% within, within like 5 minutes if the community sentiment and the coordination is there. But essentially, it's instant. So because that's the idea. The idea behind that is basically if the community feels a certain way, that's why we have the incremental aspect. That's enough of a guardrail. So if you wanted to get from 20% to 25%, you were able to do that in a very short period of time. Then that's even more of a confidence booster of like, okay, this is right, because people are actually sort of feeling those changes instantly and sort of voting again, 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 5 rounds through. So yeah, that's the answer to the two questions. Was there a third one I think you asked, or I can't quite remember?
I didn't ask a
I,
third one, but I do have one that I want to ask now. So the example
mm,
was perfect. I do appreciate you, explaining how the votes could potentially cancel out. That was really good to hear. And then in terms of the timing, you mentioned that things will happen relatively instantly, which again, I think is good to hear. Now then that then begs the question, how much time is available between the actual beginning of a vote and then the end time of a vote? Will that also be one of the parameters that's available to be dictated through the progressive governance?
that's going to be a fixed one epoch. So that's going to be a fixed one epoch. So if there's multiple changes, so for example, if you're going from 20% to 21%, and that's going to take one epoch to sort of roll through to properly be implemented by the protocol. If in the meanwhile you actually go from 21% to 22%, then it turns to 22% within that. So it adds a further epoch, I should say, and turns to 22% when that epoch sort of rolls around. So that's it in a nutshell, essentially. So it's just a single epoch, and that I think we discussed that quite thoroughly with we've discussed that with between the team, and we sort of realized that's probably a sweet spot in regards to people that gives enough time period, I suppose, to people that aren't really quite fans of that particular parameter change to either sort of do something about it or sort of coordinate accordingly. The thing with Yamfore as well is, unlike a traditional sort of lending protocol, a lot of it's fixed. So I mean fixed in the sense of, if let's say the CBRP flat fee is increased, if you have a pre-existing loan position, it's a fixed yearly interest rate, and so you've already paid your CBRP flat fee, so you're not actually affected by these updated lending parameters. So that's why it's also a very short period of time until these changes are actually implemented officially, if you will. But yeah, so you kind of so for the people that actually have loan positions and they stand to either gain or lose, they're kind of in a bit of a limbo situation because it doesn't really quite affect them. It's just for new participants sort of entering through.
Yeah, thank you for that clear up there. I think again, with governance, I've seen it done so many ways, and I'm sure you have too, which is why you've come to the decision of using progressive governance. That it's always seems like when I look at governance models, it's like trying to pick the good and then add whatever might still be missing, right? Every
Mm,
protocol does it differently. Some people do, like you mentioned, the temperature check. Some people skip the temperature checks. Some
yeah.
people do it, based on the amount of votes. And I just feel like there's so many variables here that this is an area where we've yet to really perfect it as a whole chain. So please don't take offense to that. But I'm interested to see and to hear about this brand new version of governance coming to Yamfore. So I'll be keeping my eyes open to finally get my hands on that, hopefully as a part of V2. Will that be included in the upcoming testnet, or will that be something that is launched after the initial mainnet?
No, that's after V2. So with V2, the home section is so we've recently renamed a couple of the sort of recategorized a couple of the tabs. So the home section will be available, the borrow section will be there, the position section, which was the loan section previously, will be there as well, and the market section will be there. The 1/5 that's missing will be the vote section, and that's partly due to us just wanting to take our time with this. And like you've mentioned before, like we still are essentially refining the idea. And I've said the core fundamental idea of just it being this sort of tug of war, that won't be changing. But just sort of like the smaller things around it. Let's say, for example, we wanted to make changes instant instead of the epochly sort of period of time, right? So that's actually probably something I've been looking at, sort of thinking, if we're meant to have this system where it's meant to be very fluid, it's meant to be 24/7, people can sort of join and leave as they sort of come, they come and go, and we already have these guardrails up. Why should, and also knowing that people that have loan positions in Yamfore and utilizing Yamfore, they already have these sort of fixed parameters that they aren't affected. We could just have those changes be instant instead. So just these sort of smaller ideas around the core fundamental idea of progressive governance that we're sort of like still polishing and finalizing. But essentially, yeah, that's our sort of stance. But no for Yam4 testnet V2, progressive governance will not be launching with that.
Awesome. And I think just to close this out here, I want to just quickly pull this up. For the viewers, if you guys want to find out more about progressive governance and some of the different parameters that are going to be available, feel free to head over to yam4.getbook.io. And under their tokenomics section, they've actually got all the parameters and their ideal descriptions written out here. So things that will be able to be changed, as a part of progressive governance include the CBLP flat fee, which is, I think, what we're just kind of talking about. We've got the accepted stablecoins, which is going to be the list of stablecoins accepted by the protocol. We've got the CBLP treasury, whitelisted stake pools, the fixed interest rate, the ADA exchange pool, quorum requirements, proposal deposits, and then the CBLP auction portal. So quite a bit here, which is really good to see though, right? Because again, once the protocol launches, the community may not utilize it as you guys had developed, or they might think of other use cases that you guys maybe had not thought of as well. So for them to be able to change and update these parameters, I think is a really good way to kick things off. And I would imagine that as the protocol matures, that we may get additional parameters that are also able to be updated or changed. So in closing here, Brandon, I do want to jump into one last topic. We're just getting at right over the 30-minute threshold here for today's interview. But let's jump into the FTO. So the Yamfore tokenomics are currently available, again, on the same exact platform. If I bring them up here, we've got 50% going towards the community, 20% going towards miscellaneous. We've got 5% going towards the protocol treasury, 1% towards the airdrop, 5% towards the NFBO, and then about 19% going towards the team. Do you mind breaking down why you guys have chosen these amounts, maybe touching on what's included within miscellaneous, and then last but not least, just any general information surrounding the upcoming FTO or token launch?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the 50% for the community. So 50% we felt was tokenomics are always a tricky thing to sort of get done right, right? And it's very much dependent on what sort of protocol you're building and just community sentiment. And there's a whole host of other factors. But from the get-go, though, we wanted to have a very healthy circulating amount. So we chose at least at a minimum threshold 50%. So that's for the community, and that will be what is being distributed through the FTO. We have the 20%. So 20% of miscellaneous is actually a lot of the aspects that people don't really talk about when it comes to just, I suppose, running a protocol, running Yamfore in general, is you have a majority of that actually as liquidity for the CBLP ADA pair on MinSwap. So a lot of that is sort of just being locked and sort of used there, just sort of creating a base where people can sort of trade from. We also pay for marketing through this. We've also paid for the auditing that's happening with TX5 through this as well, and a couple of other sort of like miscellaneous expenses. Right. We have the 5% that's for the NFBO that's been distributed. That was the initial token distribution and sell that went through. We also have 1% for the airdrop that was also supplementary to people that participated in the NFBO. So they were the main and only recipients of that as well. And then we have 5% for the protocol treasury. So that's the CBRP treasury, which is just working in tandem with the CBRP flat fee. So that the flat fee goes to the CBRP treasury, and the CBRP treasury utilizes the CBRP auction portal to distribute the tokens through. And it sort of repeats as people obviously come for loans and they have to pay for the CBRP. They have to pay for the CBRP flat fee. So that's there. 19% is for the team. We have our vesting schedule. Just it's fairly simplistic. It's fairly just two releases. So one's in the beginning of the year, so that doesn't coincide with the FTO or any of that. And the other one is a further year apart as well. So that's sort of so that's how we sort of structured that. That's also in the Gitbook docs. And that's the Yamfore CBRP tokenomics in a nutshell. We have obviously 1 billion tokens for distribution, and the FTO is the final main distribution of the CBRP tokens. And yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate the breakdown there. Now, I didn't hear a specific timeline. Do you mind maybe highlighting that?
Yeah, that's for the FTO, that's going to be a bit tricky. So we have it really sort of depends because we don't want to rush things. So we just want to sort of make sure that because the FTO will be launching in tandem with the mainnet launch, and obviously that does make things a bit more trickier in that aspect. Launching these two sort of huge events, right? But that's absolutely fine. So we would have to just wait for auditing to be completed. So as I mentioned before, the at the end of this month is when we're expecting the testnet v2 to sort of to come out and launch, and that's Yamfore finalized. And obviously TX Pipes is in our repo, so they can immediately start auditing that. And it just sort of depends how the auditing process sort of goes, the back and forth, because there might be some issues that they find. They send it over to us. We fix it and rectify it, and it's sort of just this sort of back and forth period. So yeah, we're hoping to get things generally before the end of the year, because again, Yamfore at a base level is fairly simplistic. There's not that much, there's not that many components to worry about with how we sort of design things. So I do feel confident in that aspect of sort of getting the code reviewed and sort of just getting through the auditing process faster than most teams. Plus, working with TX Pipes, they're absolute guns. They're very, very professional. They're very good. So yeah, I do feel very confident in that aspect. But yeah, we would be aiming before the end of the year just to get everything done and dusted. But if it takes a bit longer, if it takes a week or 2 or 3, that's fine. The biggest thing for us is to launch the Yamfore v2. So at that point, Yamfore is completed, and we can sort of just sort of take it very slow and steady in regards to the auditing process, because that part shouldn't be rushed. But that's what I'm sort of feeling for timeline wise.
Yeah, thank you. And I completely agree. The development of the protocol should definitely be the main focus. Without that, the actual tokens have, little to no utility, right? So
Essentially, yeah.
I'm happy to hear that you guys are focusing on that. Obviously, working with TX Pipe, they've been getting a lot of partnerships and a lot of, I think, work, just generally speaking, in the Cardano ecosystem, and they're becoming one of those go-to names. So that, I think, is positive news. And then, as you mentioned, looks like the FTO taking place sometime towards the end of the year, which again, I'll be keeping an eye out for when it comes to that.
Yeah.
Not only to highlight here on my channel, but to see how the turnout is and just everything surrounding that. We've had quite a few token launches here in the ecosystem. I think we had OrcFax launched not too long ago. We had Plutus.art, we had Sarah, and there's a few others that are still going to be upcoming. So we're in an interesting place as well with that, very similar to governance, where it seems like every single project has their own kind of take on how they want to launch. Some people prefer to go through some sort of price discovery or LBE platform. Some people like to just provide, a fixed rate, etc. And each one of those different types of launches has a different effect on how it's received, right? So again, I'll be keeping an eye out for that. As that rolls out here in the early stages of 2024. Now, the very last thing I want to pose to you, Brandon, is just going to be any maybe key takeaways or closing thoughts that you want to share with the Cardano community here when it comes to Yamfore. That could be, anything surrounding the testnet, the mainnet, what your future vision and what your future plans are.
Yeah, absolutely. I forgot to state actually, just in regards to just quickly going back to the FTO topic, we are being built, Yamfore is being built with Icon, which we've had just such a lovely development experience with. So I'd just like to just give a further shout out to TX Pipes for that as well. as well as the FTO. Another cool component of it is Yamfore is launching the FTO with the mainnet launch, and we're actually utilizing the funds to be lent out. So there is actually this very yin and yang effect, if you will, with the fact that the tokens that are the revenue that's being generated through the FTO is immediately being launched out, which is causing demand in the market because of the CBLP flat fee, which should actually see appreciation in the market, appreciation and growth in the CBLP tokens, which further sort of incentivizes more participants in the FTO. So it's very much this sort of cycle. So that'll be interesting from that aspect. In regards to just sort of closing thoughts on it, on the ecosystem and just crypto in general. Yeah, no, there's nothing in particular as opposed to just a general broad statement, but we are very much in a tumultuous time, just with crypto, where it's just very much apparent that we do need digital assets. There does need to be a layer or just a monetary network that's just a lot more free in regards to people actually holding and actually having full ownership of their assets and being able to transfer and just keep and store without worry about compensation being confiscated or just any sort of censorship in that regard. So it's more of just from what I'm seeing in the turmoil and the geopolitical issues in the world. It's more just giving me conviction with just what we're building is right, and just the crypto space in general, and just the requirement of that. So I would just sort of say that as a broad term. I don't know how things are going to look in the future. Scalability is my biggest concern when it comes to just a lot of the people are very familiar with the blockchain trilemma, scalability, security, and decentralization. So I'm not sure how we'll get into that, but it's looking like some sort of zero knowledge proofs, or maybe sharding the main chain, or some sort of combination of those things, or just layer ones and twos, and side chains also can be layer twos and layer threes, etc. And side chains can also be an aspect there as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of pans out and how we sort of tackle that. But I would say the future is definitely bright, and I would say every day I'm sort of more convinced that we do need digital assets, and people do need to have custodianship, proper custodianship of their assets. And yeah.
Yeah, well said. And I tend to agree with that general statement. I've learned over the past couple of months, just creating content and talking to people, how inaccessible some of these financial tools that we have here on Cardano and just on blockchain are to people that are not within the Web3 space. And so to finally be able to provide people with access to these brand new tools and these brand new opportunities is something that I think should be common knowledge, or at least common access, right? There shouldn't be any barriers
Mhm.
preventing somebody all the way across the world from, loaning or borrowing assets. All these things that, again, in a lot of countries right now, especially like the one that I live in, the United States, that we tend to sometimes take for granted, right? Even internet connection itself, I think it's taken for granted. So to see projects, for example, like World Mobile, right, looking to provide mobile connectivity to people all the way around the world, making that a almost a universal right, is something
Mm.
that I can definitely stand behind. And then with the platform, for example, like Yamfore, allowing for anybody around the world, regardless of their looks, their age, their gender, the ability to be able to loan and borrow, I think, again, should be some sort of right in that sense, if that makes sense. So I
Mm.
want to thank you, Brandon, for jumping on here. Again, for anybody who wants to find out more about Yamfore, their official website is going to be yamfore.io. I'll leave the link to that down below. As a part of today's video, we got a brief update surrounding their testnet, the feedback, and what the team has done to improve the protocol ahead of their V2 launch. We're also expecting their FTO to take place sometime in early portion of 2024, and I'll be covering that here on my channel here as a part of the Cardano Scoop series. That said, that will bring us to the end here for today's video. Again, Brandon, I want to say thank you. I know that you're all the way around the world, and it was a little bit to sync up here, but it is always good to have you on the channel to catch up. And I'm looking forward to hearing and probably catching up with you again once you guys launch on the mainnet. For the viewers today, if you guys found this particular video to be helpful, as always, I would appreciate you if you could tap that like button. If it's your first time stopping by the channel and you want more content like this surrounding all the builders in Cardano, consider subscribing. And if you have any questions for myself or Brandon surrounding Yamfore, then please make sure to go ahead and leave a comment down below. That said, and as always, we'll see you guys in the next video.